Hey, what's going on? This is the Saturday Down South podcast. I'm Connor O'Gara. Well, I need to address something off the top that I admittedly overlooked last pod when we were recapping all of these SEC bowl games. And by the time you look up and you realize what other people are talking about, you realize that you have forgotten a topic that's pretty pertinent to the very subject matter that we discuss twice a week. True or false? The SEC is dead.
One word answer, no. False.
Yes, I would agree. True to what you said, false to what I said, which is the SEC's dead. By the way, Kris Budden is going to join us, talk a bunch of different things, recapping 2024, and then we're going to end with Lad of the Week. And obviously, we're going to be talking about the Cotton Bowl, previewing all things Texas and Ohio State. But I saw this really come out after the Georgia loss to Notre Dame and with the Big Ten having two teams in the semifinals. And it kind of hit upon seeing everybody talking about this narrative, this discussion, that we are a Texas loss to Ohio State away from this being the first time since 2004, 2005 that the SEC would have consecutive years without a team playing in the national championship.
Mm-hmm.
Significant, right? Significant. If Ohio State takes care of business, that will be a takeaway more so than ever because it'll be a Northern national title game in consecutive years. For all the times that we've looked at that map of the teams that have won the national championship and how very few of them in the 21st century have been out of this specific region of the country, that'll be very significant. Okay. It absolutely will. And I think a lot of this discussion, at least what I've seen over the course of the past few days, is because the SEC dominance crowd that was so loud after the first round playoff games was obviously put in its place after all of those losses, not just the Tennessee loss, but also Bama and South Carolina and SEC champ Georgia losing by double digits to Notre Dame.
And to be clear, they did this to themselves because we're not talking about Clay Travis. We're talking about Lane Kiffin and like the actual members of the team. So it's not just some talking head that everyone was mad at. I do understand that.
Yeah, and I mean, even Herbstreit got into the muck with this. And, you know, Herbstreit doesn't always bang that drum, but he did in this case.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what is very clear and something that no matter how big of an SEC homer you might be, you are not flexing right now.
Mm-hmm.
There is no SEC flex to be had. Even if Texas wins a national championship, there will not be this SEC chant because obviously it's his first year in the SEC and it took a team coming over from the Big 12 to be able to give the SEC that continuation of dominance, so to speak. I don't think there would be that same feel unless we were talking about a team like Georgia or a team like Alabama or LSU that came through and really did the SEC's bidding.
I'll say too, I think there's like a twisted version of SEC fans in the national media. Like I think that they think we all get memos and we all sit around and root for each other's teams and we're all on one page all the time. I root for teams that are entertaining. And I root for teams that benefit my team. That just as a fan, that's what I do, right? So we talk about how excited am I. I'm excited about LSU's portal class. You know what I'm saying? I obviously not a huge Notre Dame guy for my own agendas, so I wanted Georgia to win that game. But it's so funny because so many media people are being like, well, all these SEC people must be disappointed. And it's like, you think Alabama was rooting for Tennessee? No.
I don't think so either. I think there are some that would like to feel better about that, but in that moment, are they? I don't know, and it's tough because you can go down a lot of different roads with that. And we know, like let's be honest here. We're talking about Feinbaum. We're talking about our guys Peter Burns. We're talking about people that get into these discussions on a bigger stage than we do here. I'll admit that. I'm perfectly fine with that. And that whenever someone who is seemingly down the middle on these subjects comes out and goes to the SEC side like Herbstreit does, that is seen, or even, you know, Sean McDonough and how very vocal he was against the Big Ten in the midst of that first round game with Notre Dame and Indiana.
Mm-hmm.
That stuff gets brought to the surface, and then that is seen as groupthink for a lot of different people. And I think that was definitely the case, and that was probably always going to be the case this year with the 12-team playoff and all the different narratives that one can have going in or coming away from it.
Mm-hmm.
But call me crazy. Well, I think history is repeating itself a bit. Or at least I'm more of the belief that history is repeating itself than we are seeing a new chapter in history and that we are heading down a totally different road.
Okay.
Go back to 2014.
I knew where you were going with this, buddy.
the entire conversation when Bama loses to Ohio State is the SEC, its reign is over. It might be, and I've talked about this before, so I don't want to repeat myself too much. It might be the reason I got this job
Right.
because there was this fear that the SEC was going to be falling off and the Big Ten was taking over. And that is why my former boss, Drew Roberts, wanted to start Saturday tradition. You saw all the things that were popping up. I've talked about this before. But when it was consecutive years without an SEC team winning at all, which included the first year of the new playoff format, it was the games were finally being decided on the field. And that was bad news for the SEC.
Of course. What's Ohio State's record against the SEC in those games again?
It depends if we're including the Arkansas 2010 Sugar Bowl, which Ohio State got stripped. It's not good. It's not good. You know it's not good. It improved with the Tennessee win, but it's not good. The SEC after that point, after 2014, put a team in the title game each of the next 8 years with 6 national titles by 3 different programs, and everyone forgot about that storyline until right just now. Okay? And the funny thing is, the SEC even had a little bit of a right to flex going into the postseason, maybe not in ways that we traditionally talk about because of how many SEC teams felt like underperformed at the top. But if you want to just look at the raw numbers of, and Bear Felica pointed this out, I think it was going into the conference championships or it was right after, whatever it was, the hay was in the barn with this discussion, but the SEC went 13-7 against the core 4 in the regular season, while the Big Ten was 6-9, the Big 12 was 5-8, and the ACC was 9-17. So what does all that mean? What should the actual takeaway be if we can't get on board with the SEC is dead? And if we are both sitting here going, that is absolutely false. It means that we probably shouldn't assume that the SEC will fail to adapt in this new era with talent being spread out more because of NIL. We can agree that one thing is true and also agree that there is probably still a way in which the SEC will benefit because it just always has during this last 20 years that we're approaching now with the way that the SEC has controlled college football. Or if the SEC really is failing to adapt, we're at least going to need a 3-year sample size of SEC teams not getting to the title game and looking like they get on this stage and then they get embarrassed. Give me 3 years of that. Okay. 2 years still a little bit too small, especially when we've already seen how it played out the last time this happened. And I'm not trying to move goalposts. Okay. Some might hear that and think I'm just trying to move goalposts for the SEC. No. I think the SEC this entire year, where again, multiple losses for every SEC team going into the postseason, I just thought it had kind of a 2014 like feel to it. And that's what we're talking about. This is kind of history repeating itself. And maybe that means Ohio State's going to beat another SEC team in the semifinal en route to a title. And the Big Ten will flex extremely loud and understandably so. Get it while you can and do whatever you can to make sure that people are giving your conference respect. I totally understand it. The SEC does it. The ACC does it when Clemson wins the national title or Florida State or whomever. But I wouldn't write the SEC eulogy just yet. And I feel like we can have some sort of a middle ground between the SEC's dead versus the SEC chance right now. I'd lean towards that. Now, if we get an Ohio State, Penn State national championship, you're going to hear all of this over again. Okay. And there will be that discussion. Yeah.
It's happened a couple of times with the SEC. Happened with LSU, Alabama. Happened with Georgia, Alabama. Welcome.
Yeah. So who knows? And if you want to retroactively count Washington as a Big Ten team,
sure. Nice to do it there now.
Yeah. Do it there. Yeah, sure. Why not? But probably I just wanted to address that at the top because I know that's been everywhere. And I guess I kind of came away from the pod that we recorded the other day feeling a little bit weird that I didn't get a chance to weigh in on that after seeing how out there that opinion was on people with a national platform.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, remember when Nick Saban retired and I said, I referenced the Kobe Bryant commercial. And I said, they don't hate the good ones. They hate the great ones. And the way that kind of the national media, and I don't want to cheapen this because as I said, as you said, it is, the SEC network, it is Lane Kiffin, it is Nick Saban on the game day set. It is Kirk
Saban's a big part of this too. That's a good point.
Yeah. Saban's been part of this. And me, I try to leave Saban alone because he's whooped my team so many times that just sounds like me being a loser when I talk about him. But he has, since 2019, been given the spot to campaign for his team. And just as Ryan Day did also in 2019, after beating, I think, Wisconsin in the Big Ten championship game, was on TV going, we need to be number one. That's your job as a college football coach. Okay. It's your job to sunshine pump your team and your rivals in your conference because you get payouts there, and you get to say, "Oh, we lost to the team that won the national championship. Been there, not so bad, right?" And
Unless
so,
you're Notre Dame, and then you get to keep all 14 million, and you don't have to distribute it to anyone. And that's a little bit different than everybody else in the conference. But you're exactly right. That is kind of the point.
yeah, and I mean, again, great example is Notre Dame, right? I'm not going to get into the religious aspect of Notre Dame, but basically an Ivy League school, private school, no conference, standalone TV deal. When people are acting like this is a plucky underdog versus Georgia, that's all I need to know. It's that you guys are not speaking at a factual basis. You're speaking out of emotions. And just as always, we as a society, now we don't just call people names. We try to find the moral high ground. And I think that Southerners historically have been a group of people that it was just fine to dump on in public. And that's why a lot of the tweets have had, the undercurrent of, oh, you're paying labor. Now the SEC is struggling. Hey, man, I just want to add one thing to that. So the SEC just added the University of Texas at Austin. If your takeaway is that the SEC is cooked because they don't have any money, I think that the SEC is going to be just fine. I think that I would encourage, and I think that Kirby Smart and Kalen DeBoer and certainly Brian Kelly, as he already have, would love the national discourse to be how the SEC is washed and that they're poor and that they can't compete with Ohio State, which, mind you, as you said, there was no dominant team this year.
Up until the playoff. Oregon was considered the dominant team, the least flawed team, and then they get into the playoff and Ohio State shows them, hey,
smacks them.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's exactly where I was going. Oregon was a dominant team. They beat Ohio State in the regular season. Okay, they go one and done in the playoff. Where's the Big Ten indictment there? When your team was supposed to win the national title.
Fair point.
When you're looking at Alabama losing Nick Saban, when you're looking at an Ole Miss team that is Ole Miss, when you're looking at a Georgia team with a backup quarterback who, as Mike Bobo, and could not figure out their offense all year, when you're looking at a Texas team that Quinn Ewers' arm has been barbecue chicken since he badly beat Michigan, a team that beat Ohio State, right? But that was not even seen as a good win back then. And now suddenly Michigan is this crazy, good, rich team that we can't, they got Bryce Underwood and 2 transfers and now they're all rich. I get it. So point being, all I have to say about this is what I've said over and over and over again. And this is a credit to my good friends at Arkansas. My aunt is a huge Arkansas fan. I made the point to one of my friends who was a big SEC hater. And I said, this is years ago. I've said it on this podcast before. When you go to Arkansas and, Chad Morris is there or, they're struggling under Pittman, those fans are locked in. My joke is they're still throwing batteries. It's that's the biggest thing they got going on at Arkansas.
Arkansas fans will bleep that for you. That was, you should have given a little bit of a warning. You can't just say Chad Morris out there without any sort of, come on. Let's.
And this is respect to Arkansas fans because they showed up for those games. And they were locked in and they read the articles and they were all about the coaching search and it paid off for them. And they had lots of opinions about Sam Pittman and we encourage that. And I talked to those people and they love the sport. Okay. You, as an Indiana grad, know that how many people became Indiana football fans this year because it was a basketball school. And I look up and down the roster of the Big Ten and you could say, oh, USC, great brand. Okay. They went 2-0 versus the SEC. I can't say anything about USC, but they were not a playoff team. UCLA is a basketball school. Oregon, if we want to make this whole case about how, okay, it's all about money. It's all about Phil Knight. This is a team with a 65,000 seat arena that their whole pitch is we have cool jerseys and money. And how'd that go when they snapped the ball against Ohio State? So there's not this team there. Ohio State, we said in the preseason that Ohio State was going to be the huge favorite to win after all the money they spent, the huge roster. Go ahead.
Sorry. I don't mean to interrupt on that because I think I think you might, you're heading in the exact direction that I think is ultimately going to be the takeaway of this season of maybe nobody gets the right to flex except the team that spent $20 million on its roster. And it doesn't have to be this conference-wide regional dynamics are shifting. Maybe just the team that spent crazy amount of money that is really well coached when it's not facing Michigan, that had the most talent, played the best football at a time when it mattered, and it got into the playoff because of the expanded format. And that ends up being the big takeaway of the season. It doesn't have to, we don't always have to get in these conversations, even though it feels like we need to examine these dynamics. And that's one of those things where if I'm sitting around with my buddies discussing, and I was talking about this with Bobby Carpenter earlier, who obviously, like, for those who know Bobby, big Ohio State guy, and does a really good job on Sirius talking about all things national as well. But one of the things he asked me was, like, kind of, all right, then, like, why did this year play out the way that it did for the SEC? And why does it then feel like a letdown? And if there's a simple answer that we don't need to get into regional dynamics and NIL and coaches portal, all these different things, quarterback play was just disappointing for the teams that looked like they were going to have really good quarterback play, and it just didn't end up materializing in that sort of way. That's the boring answer to all of this, and nobody really wants to get into. But if we go back and look at all those preseason Heisman lists and take a look at Jalen Milroe and Carson Beck and Quinn Ewers and even Jackson Dart, who obviously still had a really solid year, but obviously his moments down the stretch in those losses were what proved to be costly for Ole Miss. If we want to just look at it from that standpoint and go, yeah, it actually ended up just being kind of a disappointing year at quarterback in the SEC, and that's probably what the conference's undoing was ultimately, that's a much easier way to answer this than, I don't know, man. I think NIL has really changed the way that these conference dynamics have been able to form.
Yeah, I fully agree. And if the takeaway is, about money, if it's about all this different stuff, what it is it's boring because it's takes that people have had saved up since the Bush administration, and they've been waiting to get these takes up. Oh, I mean, well, the second one. I don't think you can count the Tennessee title. It's a little bit too late. I think you got to go, Alabama had
Tennessee title is Clinton. We're talking.
Yeah, exactly. I'm talking about W. I'm talking about when the SEC really started when we had the 2 Florida titles, the 2 LSU titles. Auburn was in there. Alabama was in there. So people have been sitting on this stuff about how they hate the South. And remember, Kevin Warren was the king of this, the way they handled COVID. And they've been trying to hate the South this whole time. And cool, that's boring. Okay, we've already tried that. We've already tried the SEC is dead. We already tried Bama died for 17 years. Lord knows I did. But I say that to say, do you want me to be sad that Nick Saban's not at Alabama anymore? Do you want me to shed a tear that Alabama is not smacking my team, that they're losing to Vanderbilt? Because
that's a big part of this.
Here's what's so funny to me is that these people, when they think that we're these low information voters, for lack of a better word, that we all just get together in our little SEC huddles or Discord servers, or maybe that's too advanced for us, and we say, oh, Alabama's bad now. This is so scary and sad for us. That's more recruits for my team, okay? So I'll say it that way. To your point, yeah, the real answer is so much more interesting than that. The real answer is about how Ole Miss, paid for this big roster. It didn't go the way they thought. What are they going to do now? Alabama did some things right. They have Ryan Williams. Milroe's gone. What are they going to do now? There are so many fascinating individualized storylines in the SEC as to why each team is here. Okay, Mike Denbrock moving from LSU, where he won a Heisman, to Notre Dame. Guess what? Yeah. That guy's really smart. Okay, yeah. I owe him an apology. That's who I owe an apology, is Mike Denbrock, because that guy can run the dang football.
I'll file that away.
He can run the dang football, and that's what LSU couldn't do this year, and that's why they lost weird games. And so, point being, I think that if we want to have an interesting conversation, and like guys like me and you would go back and forth with people and say, okay, well, here's what happened. When people say what happened in Alabama, I could tell you, and I won't make a lot of jokes because it's interesting stuff to me. But if we want to sit there and be like, oh, we're sure, I just want to wrap up where I started. Please tell that to Kirby Smart. Please tell that to Nick Saban. Please tell that to Steve Sarkisian, that his team is too poor to win a national title. Because I look at this Big Ten, and I'm not going to go through this line by line, but like, okay, Michigan just won a national title. I'm not sure they could do it again, but they have money. We're going to include them. Ohio State, cool. Oregon's never won a national title. Until they actually show up at some point, I'm not going to pretend like this is a national title. Cool. They appear and get smoked. Good for them. Outside of that, USC, it's been since before the SEC run, since they were really a contender. Again, they beat my team, but that's so did lots of people. So point being, I look up and down this conference that has been perfectly built to spread this narrative that they are the one conference. And I'm like, how many of you guys are really going in there and scrapping with Texas and LSU and Alabama? And not to keep the score, but that's what we want to do. We want to hold Ole Miss and South Carolina up to the standards of who? Purdue? So that's kind of my thing, is like, these are groups of passionate fan bases that don't like losing, and they don't like being made fun of.
Yeah.
And I think if you checked on Feinbaum, day one was a little bit of, I'm making fun of this other team. And day two is, all right, guys, this doesn't have anything to do with me, an Auburn fan, that South Carolina lost to Illinois. Why are you mad at me?
Yeah, it just gets too generalized with some of this stuff. And that's a little bit of a frustrating thing. It's something I try to avoid, but it can be very difficult. And it will be very difficult if it plays out with these two Big Ten teams getting to the national championship, and all of a sudden that resurfaces. And then people that don't actually watch this that closely, they all of a sudden have takeaways that are a bit too broad. And obviously that's that's what they're allowed to do with a national stage like that.
Someone from an NFL guy yesterday said, I can't believe anyone didn't think that Bo Nix was an NFL quarterback. It's like, all right, guys. Like, what were you watching? So, yeah, like I said, Penn State can really prove me wrong. If Penn State can get in there and play respectable or win a title, that's a team that can move from one column to the other. But I'm interested by this. I really am. It's a great time to follow the sport. That's it.
I've got a Penn State take coming up with Kris Budden that I'll save for later. But just be ready for it, because your boy could potentially beat in some crow. All right, let's talk about the other semifinal game. Let's talk about the Cotton Bowl, Texas and Ohio State. Ohio State's a 6-point favorite. The over-under, will 6.5 catches, 145 receiving yards, and 2 touchdowns for Jeremiah Smith.
That guy's scary.
That's what he's averaging in the playoffs so far.
Yep.
That's pretty good. Tennessee, looking back, did a better job on him than Oregon did. So Tennessee at least wasn't leaving him uncovered at different points of that game. Granted, single coverage on Julio Jones 2.0, probably not the best strategy. We know that now. That's going to be the challenge for Texas. You've got perhaps the best secondary, the second best, a top 3 secondary, pretty much any metric you want to look at. And if you are our guy, PK, you might be thinking to yourself, wait a minute, I've got the Jim Thorpe Award winner in Jahdae Barron.
If you're a PK, you're thinking, thank God I never have to see this Scatabo guy again. Done with him.
Scatabo, not Scatabo.
Sorry.
We respect Cam Scatabo. Look.
Sorry to sound like my mom when I call people boo like that. I don't know.
Who would you rather face, Cam Scatabo or Jeremiah Smith?
And that's really the answer. Like, they had to do one then the other. Let's say a perfect Texas fit.
I don't want to say I'd rather face either of those dudes, because
I don't want them to hear me say that.
I know, right? They'll just prove me wrong. Jeremiah Smith's just going to come over to my house and just moss me, and Cam Scatabo's going to run right through me as I'm walking on my driveway. I don't want anybody to hear that. But it's a difficult thing, I think, to balance if you are a defensive coordinator and you've had 15 games of your team mostly looking really, really good in one specific area. And if you look at it from just the Barron perspective, like, this is a guy who, like, nobody hit more than 43 receiving yards against him in a game all year. He doesn't have a touchdown allowed in coverage this year. Why wouldn't I trust my guy to go up against Jeremiah Smith and win that battle? Why wouldn't I trust my guy? I'll say this. I love Jahdae Barron. Great player. He has been one of the big reasons why Texas has been so steady on the defensive side of the ball this year. But that's a losing battle if Texas think it's going to work with a 5'11 corner against that 6'3", 215, 220-pound freshman, and we shouldn't even be calling him a freshman anymore. Okay?
The grown man.
He is a grown man in every way. And Texas has said a lot of the right things to lead you to believe that it is acknowledging the grown manness of Jeremiah Smith. Tennessee thought it could do the single coverage thing. Jeremiah Smith admitted afterwards he thought it was a joke. He's saying, in my head, I'm laughing. Both touchdowns that he scored in that game were against corners in single coverage, wherein Will Howard didn't have a real decision to make. And I was the one saying I would like to see how Jermod McCoy matches up against Jeremiah Smith. I think that's going to be an awesome matchup. They're going to have these great battles. Jeremiah Smith won that. Okay, he did. And it wasn't Jermod McCoy all night for Tennessee. Ricky Gibson had some tough moments in that one. But you get what I'm saying. That guy saw man coverage way too much, and he feasted. That is why you just don't make that decision if you're Texas. You want to avoid the situations in which Will Howard can look at his formation pre-snap, look at what the defense is doing, and go, oh, I got Jeremiah Smith in single coverage. That's my read. I don't have to worry about anything else. If you play man, he will burn you. That's just a fact. And to be fair, Oregon played zone and then just forgot that Smith existed at different points of that game. That touchdown that he had early in the second quarter, where I don't know what Oregon safeties were doing in that spot, but way too much separation. I mean, there were plays that he made later in that game where he had no separation whatsoever, and he's catching passes as he's twisting out of bounds, and you're thinking to yourself, who is this alien? So it obviously did not work out well to leave him that much alone as Oregon did at different points in that game.
And hey, if you're a Tennessee fan and you're a little bit angry listening to this, just know you did a little bit better than Oregon. So, hey, number one team in America, okay?
There's your moral victory. That's all you need. It's a huge matchup for Texas because it's extremely unique. Texas struggled with another 6'3" freshman receiver, TJ Moore. That Clemson game, he's the only guy that Texas faced this year that hit 100 receiving yards. And Michael Taft was asked about if there's any sort of comp for Jeremiah Smith. He wouldn't even say TJ Moore. Okay. He wouldn't go there. And I don't really blame him. Instead, he said there's no way that this guy is 18 years old with that size. And it's true. He's 19. He turned 19 the day before the Michigan game. So, I mean, now we really have to respect him now that he's a 19-year-old. But
here's the real question. Are you taking him or Ryan Williams?
Oh, I'm taking Jeremiah Smith.
Okay. Because we thought that was like the best a rookie or a freshman receiver could ever do. And I'm looking at Smith going, wow.
Even Bama fans, even you would have to admit at this point, you would take Jeremiah Smith over the course of the next 2 years. And I mean, no disrespect to Ryan Williams. He might enter this next season considered one of the best 5 players in college football.
Mm-hmm.
Jeremiah Smith will be one. Okay. I feel very confident in saying that, barring injury, he has been that dude. Now, you go back and you're like, all right, well, he's put up ridiculous numbers. First ever 1,000-yard true freshman receiver that Ohio State has had. In that lineage of receivers, that's unbelievably impressive. Okay,
that means you're beating grown men.
Yes,
who were 4 and 5 stars to even get on the field.
Definitely. But at the same time, you look back at the year that he had, and it's easy to forget going into that Tennessee game, he was coming off of his 2 worst output games of the year. And Michigan, in a weird way, Michigan has this day in which he is so quiet. And oddly enough, Michigan being without Will Johnson that game might have helped them because they didn't look at that. At least I don't think so. Wink Martindale didn't look at that matchup and go, well, I've got one guy that can cover him and that'll be fine. No, Michigan turned it into kind of an all hands on deck effort. And then Jeremiah Smith gets 2 second half targets of that game. His last target came with 25 minutes left in that game. When I said this is a fireable offense, what Ryan Day did after that game, it was stuff like that. Okay. You just can't have that happen.
Hey, that's who Sark needs to call is Wink Martindale because he saw both of those freshmen in a row. And he had like nobody, like Will Johnson was out the first game and then half the team had declared and he was like, no worries.
Yep. Did a whale of a job. And I won't pretend to understand the X's and O's. There are people in this business that can break that down. What Michigan did, what Wink Martindale did in consecutive matchups against those freshman aliens. But clearly, whatever Will Howard was seeing at the line of scrimmage during those rare instances that Chip Kelly and Ryan Day decided to let him throw the football, it wasn't screaming feet 4. Okay? And it's probably unrealistic to think that Texas will have that same sort of effect. Even if he doesn't, even if Will Howard is feeling good about what he sees at the line of scrimmage, I think either way, he's going to force feed Jeremiah Smith targets. You just have to. There is no world, though, that we're going to recap this pod. We're going to do the recap pod on Sunday, and we're going to look at each other and go, wow, Ohio State didn't target Jeremiah Smith in the final 25 minutes of that game. Even if Smith is in the injury tent, Will Howard is throwing his way in the final 25 minutes. Hey, maybe he'll get 2 feet in bounds. Maybe he'll get 1 foot in bounds. Make a play. You never know. He reported eligible, right? Coach, he's holding on to his hamstring that's falling off of his leg right now. I don't care. Jeremiah Smith can go make a play.
He's open. You heard him. He's always open.
What does Jamar Chase say?
Yep.
Yeah, you get it. The goal for Texas will be to disguise those looks at the line of scrimmage. And ideally, their pass rushers will do what neither Tennessee nor Oregon could do, and that is sack Will Howard. Easier said than done. The last time that he really got pressured was by Abdul Carter, the Penn State star. Since that game, which was the first Saturday in November, Ohio State, Penn State, just 2 sacks taken for Will Howard. Can Colin Simmons, can he be what Abdul Carter was? I think that's possible. I wouldn't rule that out. Last 6 games that he's played, the true freshman for Texas, 5 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, and a pick. He's really important because if Smith is getting separation, you need those instances in which we watch the replay on whatever the all 22 view is, and we say, wow, he had Jeremiah Smith, but he was running for his life, and he couldn't quite see that level of the defense. And that's why Texas was able to survive that possession, whatever the case may be. Trey Moore, he's really the guy that I think has to get going for Texas. And, for a while, he was quiet. The UTSA transfer came over, put up huge numbers at UTSA. And too many instances in the first half of the season where you're like, didn't they? Trey Moore, he's healthy. He's out there, right? And then latter half of the season, he's been a different player. He was in Sam Levitt's ear in the Peach Bowl. He didn't actually, if you look back at the numbers too, didn't have a sack until the final 6 games, and he's now got 5.5 just in that stretch alone. I think that battle is going to have a massive say in whether Ohio State continues to look like a world beater. That's what this comes down to. They have reached this peak that we thought in the preseason, as you mentioned, we thought it was possible. But how did we think it was going to look? Well, it's going to be the ground attack. It's just getting chunks of yards at will, and they're going to be pushing people around. And yeah, they're going to hit on the big pass plays. But since they have really opened up that passing game in the playoff, it has taken Ohio State to new heights. And I think it's fair to call them a juggernaut at this point after they jumped out to a 21-0 lead against Tennessee. They jumped out to a 34-0 lead against Oregon. They have come out swinging on both sides of the ball and reminded the world, $20 million roster, might not have the answers against Michigan. Everyone else seems to work out. Seems to be a very solid strategy if you can get it. Does that defense have the answer for Quinn Ewers? Defense that also had a lot of money that went into it. Revenge game for Quinn Ewers? Not really. I'm not going to go there. As he said on this very show a couple weeks ago, he left Ohio State to get back to his resources. Take that for what it is. This is a legacy for him.
But we're poor.
Right. Yeah, right. Texas is poor.
Confirmed. But we're poor.
Yeah.
They got the laws changed so a gentleman could transfer. What are they going to do?
Everybody looks at Austin and goes, you know what? I don't think they have it. I don't think they're really going to struggle in this new era. Mm-hmm. This is a legacy game for Quinn Ewers. And I feel like I've said that at a few different points, but you're in Texas. Bevo's going to be there, presumably not able to run over any beloved mascots. If he ran over Brutus, I'd have a very different reaction than him running over Uga. So we'll cross that bridge if and when we come to it. But you're facing the toughest defense you've ever faced, I think. You're finally an underdog, too. Get this. It's the first time all year that Texas has been an underdog.
Well, now hold on. You're talking about Texas facing the toughest defense they've faced?
Yes.
I would say in the first game were all Super Saiyan 5. I don't know how Georgia did that in the first game.
You're right. You're okay. Let me back up. You're exactly right. I'm saying the toughest from a standpoint of how we feel about you going in.
Yeah.
We were not feeling that way about Georgia going in. Georgia obviously showed up, and it's basically impossible to replicate what Georgia did that night. Thanks for cleaning that up. You're exactly right. Georgia fans, I mean no disrespect. Your defense was an all-world unit that night. 100% fair. I mean coming into a game and how we feel about you week to week. I think Ohio State would probably check that box. Even Bama in 23 I don't think was getting the same type of defensive respect that this Ohio State defense is getting. Okay. But think about that. And I wonder about this with Ewers.
Dude, Oregon looked like children against them. Dylan Gabriel, who's like we talked about, a Heisman contender, one of the best quarterbacks in America. The way that they were getting thrown sideways, like Big Brother type, I've never seen a team rank that high, look that small in a game. I'm so serious. This late in the season, I was like, oh.
Yeah. Ohio State has earned that right. Okay. And that's a big part of this as well, as much as we're going to spend, we spent time talking about the Jeremiah Smith dynamic and all that. But what they have been able to do up front is obviously very, very noteworthy, and how you're able to win these games convincingly against respected units like what they've faced so far. Texas is an underdog for the first time since last year's Alabama game. 27 consecutive games as a favorite. That streak very likely coming to an end unless we see some massive line shift, in which case we're going to have a different conversation about what happened. Will Howard's got pneumonia and he can't be on the field. Jeremiah Smith got snowed in and he couldn't make it to Austin, which by the way, or not to Austin, but to Dallas, Fort Worth. Mm-hmm. That's another weird element that all of a sudden is going to be discussed. Ohio State is going to be traveling to Dallas, but it's potentially snowing in Dallas. What's going on here?
How do these trends work? Is this going to be the most expensive college football ticket? Do you think? Because these are huge fan bases, big market, local market. Yeah,
gotta be. Ohio State fans have been saving up for this one too.
Yep,
a little bit, maybe a little bit, but I agree. I think it's going to be an extremely expensive ticket to be able to get. But think about that from Texas's standpoint, being a favorite in 27 consecutive games, and you only lost 4 of those games, 3 of which were to top 5 teams, 2 to Georgia, 1 to Washington in the semifinal last year, and then the other to the non-top 5 team was last year's Oklahoma game. And you know how that played out. For Ewers, this is an opportunity to show the world that you have that gear. You have that top tier, great college football quarterback of the playoff era type game in you. Because I feel like I bang the drum for Ewers more than most at this point because it hasn't looked as pretty as we thought it would this year. But I would tend to say it's fair to point out he didn't change a lot of minds by beating Clemson and Arizona State. I think that 4th and 13 will forever be remembered. I don't know how much the average college football fan, based on what I've seen, looked at that play and thought, Ewers is a different guy than I thought. Okay?
Not me.
Not you. I know. Exactly.
Not us. Yeah. It's
Yeah.
We joked about it. I know I said it at the thing, but it's like, this he usually does it at the beginning. It gets worse at the end. But like, this is kind of who he is. It's funny because he ended with. I joked about this with the Arizona State media. He ended with like the most average Quinn Ewers stat line, and then Scatterboo ended with like the most average Scatterboo stat line, and then
Right.
they canceled out.
Yeah, and Ewers ends up putting up bigger numbers than I think probably he was trending towards in the middle of the second half of that
They were
one.
sitting on the ball for most of that game. That's the thing. Yeah, he looked like he wasn't playing well at all.
Yeah, but now is your chance if you're Quinn Ewers to show that against an elite Ohio State defense, which surrendered just 6 passing touchdowns in 14 games. 4 of those came against Oregon, by the way. This is your chance to show you belong. You belong in those conversations. You deserve to be remembered in the same way that Vince Young and Colt McCoy were. Maybe there's nothing he can do because of how unbelievably influential those guys were at the time that they came to Texas and the way that they were able to kind of leave their legacies. And it probably helps Colt McCoy's case that, Bama ultimately runs away with the national championship after he gets hurt. I still think Bama wins that game, and even if he's on the field. Take that for whatever your narrative is, I guess. But this is a huge opportunity for Ewers. I think that Ohio State defense, we need to point out the strengths that they have shown, even as they were getting skewered by the national media. Before that Oregon rematch, Ohio State's last passing touchdown allowed was in the first Oregon game, October 12th.
Oh.
Yeah.
Man, I was wrong about that. Oh.
It's a 2.5 month stretch. That's Caleb Downs in that secondary. They will absolutely make you pay. It can't be for Ewers a game full of those predetermined decisions unless that predetermined decision is you realize that you've got Matthew Golden in single coverage or he's got a cushion and you're thinking this guy can go and make a play. I will make up Ewers' mind for him in that situation. I'll call it out from my TV at home. It's not going to be full Leo DiCaprio from the couch, but it's going to be Matthew Golden single coverage. There's your read. There's your guy. Go attack that. Safeties peeking in the backfield. Matthew Golden sneaking behind them. There's your read. Go do that. Any path to a Texas victory includes Matthew Golden playing ridiculously well, continuing to play ridiculously well. And it would also help if Isaiah Bond looked healthier than he did in the Peach Bowl when he got 22 snaps, but 0 catches and 1 decleater on that Ewers pick. Really bad hit, man. Oh, that was bad.
Yeah.
I don't think
you just got to tell him to run straight and call Caleb Downs names. I think if you want to not throw any picks here,
Caleb, look over here. Yeah, I mean, a lot of battles I'm sure that those two had in practice at Alabama. 2 guys that left that program and were 2 of the biggest losses for that Alabama team this past year. Looking back on it, but yeah, just being a decoy would be helpful.
Because that's what I'm saying. I know I always talk about the picks, but that's what Caleb Downs is made for, especially like Golden, as we talked about, plays like he's 6'12", but in reality, he's 6 feet tall. So when you throw the ball a little bit high, you got Caleb Downs back there. He can't go gadget that. So yeah. It's going to be fun.
Yeah. I don't think this is a situation where Sark would prefer to have Ewers throwing it 30 times. I don't think Ohio State, with what it's doing well defensively, would mind if Ewers threw it that many times, but the way that we've seen the emergence of Jack Sawyer and Cody Simon and JT, I'm going to crush the pronunciation of this. Wait for it. Tuimoloau. I think I actually got it right the first time. And then I didn't feel as good saying it as I feel when I say Uyangalale or Iamalava. Like we just didn't feel quite as crisp with it. But they've been playing unbelievably well after they kind of had some quiet moments during the regular season. Ideally for Texas, you're going to find some sort of run game. You need to be able to keep those guys from pinning their ears back. That's obvious. Texas couldn't find the run game against Arizona State. Take away Dylan Gabriel. Ohio State held the Ducks to 20 rushing yards on 16 carries. Yeah, they were really, really good. That's the biggest concern if you're a Texas fan. Run play goes nowhere, incomplete on second down. It's 3rd and 9. Ewers had 6 interceptions on 3rd down this year. Only 3 FBS quarterbacks had more interceptions on 3rd down. I think that cost Texas this game. It's not a game in which Texas is down 20-0 before people get to their seats, like what Ohio State's been doing in the playoffs so far. In the Cotton Bowl, Bevo probably charges Will Howard if they get out to a 20-0 lead and prevents that from happening. Just give us a delay, get Texas settled in. Even if Bevo gets thrown out, he'll be the sacrificial lamb for this one. Maybe he'll actually do something productive. But it is a game in which Texas just feels like it doesn't quite have that juice. And if it does have that juice, we'll be having different conversations about Texas on Sunday. Ohio State doesn't quite look like the world beater that it's been the first 2 playoff games, but it makes enough plays to be able to win this one 27-23.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just looking at this box score from this Oregon game in all. So you're telling me, I don't want to get into the semantics here because these box scores we've talked about, agreed on, they're all a little bit weird, but this is a team with 16 carries that gave up 13 tackles for loss.
It's hard to do. It's really hard to do. Now,
a sack
lot of
is
that
not,
sacks.
can you get, so a sack is a tackle for loss and
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
there you go.
Yeah.
So then I'm like, but 8 sacks. That's the other part of it. And it's
I eliminated Dylan Gabriel from that.
No, you're right. That's the thing. But I'm like, okay, the fact that they were able to get pressure, on the running backs, on Dylan Gabriel, on every play, if it wasn't a sack, it was a tackle for loss. Basically, is what I'm saying. Like, it didn't matter if they ran the ball, if they threw the ball. They always had. And again, the kind of preview I had here was they didn't exactly have the stars. That's a strength. You have 8 guys who are really good at the front 7. That's actually a good thing, some would say. But yeah, this would be an all-time Sark 4D chess, saving all the good plays situation. I have been wrong at every turn about Ohio State. It would be insanity, homerism to pick Texas here. I think that it is going to be Ohio State's day. We talked about, and I literally said this in the preview, and then again, Scatterboo, like hand up, kind of made this into the story. I'm not exactly going to say this is how this game played out, but like I was like, Texas is going to look really good in this game. But then later on, all the injuries, all that different stuff could really come into play. And we talk about an offensive line for Texas that used to be their strength, that is now a little bit more banged up. In week 4, you think, wow, this team could actually kind of stand up to Ohio State now.
And then Georgia happens and you realize, you face some of these elite defenses. It's a little bit tougher to kind of establish that balance.
Yep, exactly. That's exactly what I was going with that, where it's like, and that's why I said it at the Georgia thing, because I'm like, well, it's always kind of the talent. We talk about this. There are upsets, and then there is a team with equal talent smoking you, a la Oregon. And so at the end of the day, Ohio State is, you saying they're well coached right now and me not laughing is a huge testament to Ryan Day and Chip Kelly. And it's
Jim Knowles too.
Jim Knowles
doesn't get enough credit, I think, on that defense.
Yeah, that was a hire that I loved at the time. It looked a little bit shaky for the first year or two, and I kind of checked out. Like, I just wasn't evaluating him after that because I thought it would really upgrade their defense, and this looks like the defense I was scared of. He was the one that came from
Oklahoma State.
Yep, yeah. And I remember they had a great defense that year. Yeah. That was like the playoff borderline team, and I was like, this is a great DC. And so they've built a great staff. They've kind of like, paid the money and everything. So, yeah, I think it really just like it will take some kind of to your point, I think just Quinn Ewers' Herculean game, because there aren't enough guys left. Who is the Texas running back that you feel good enough about that you could say, hey, we can't throw the ball?
I always love Wisner. Jaden Blue at this point would make me nervous. With the fumbling issues that he's had, he would still make me nervous. Now, Wisner's not going to be – now, he's been obviously down the stretch, end of the season – I don't have to tell A&M fans about this. I don't have to tell Clemson fans about this. He has had moments where he has taken over, and perhaps I'm looking a little bit too much at how Arizona State was able to contain him and how it just didn't feel like those running lanes were there.
But that's a big problem. Arizona State, that was a matchup that we really liked going into that game when we said, hey, even with a banged-up offensive line, they should be able to push around Arizona State. And they weren't.
Yeah, I didn't think they were going to be able to push them around as well as they were able to push around Clemson. Just you look at the numbers, Arizona State had been much better against the run than Clemson had, obviously. But
good point.
Yeah, that's going to be the thing that Texas just has to find. And if you haven't found that yet, and if this is just a one-dimensional Texas offense, you're just going to be waiting for the bad thing to happen. That's I think the problem going into this one, because as much as I feel like Wisner is a fun, slippery back, and when that 1-2 punch is right with Wisner and Blue, Texas feels borderline unbeatable. and I'm probably focusing a little bit too much on game control and not so much what the actual scoreboard is saying. But I don't know that you can say with confidence that that's going to be there. And that's the problem. Even though I've given that Texas backfield and what Sark has done with it a lot of credit this year for making do with the injuries that they've had in the backfield, I just I wouldn't feel like that's going to be a given that they're able to get that part of the game going.
Yeah, I think, and it's not that I'm like saying like, oh, I disagree with you, but I would recommend, not that I'm an expert or anything, but I said this. I remember saying this exactly twice. It was the Bama game last year for Texas, and it was the Michigan game this year. Funny that both kind of went similarly in a way, where I was like, hey, this is going to be the Quinn Ewers show. And both of those, he actually played exactly the way that I hoped he would to prove that right. And then to your point, it all kind of started to trail. So I would say like, in my opinion, unless somebody really just goes Super Saiyan a la Georgia's defense, you really kind of got one guy. Because again, Golden is a great player, but he's not Jeremiah Smith. He's not like one of these guys that you could just target 11 times, 15 times in a game like this. So I think it's going to come down to the decision making, because exactly to your point, look, I mean, Wisner had a fumble in this game. They recovered it in the Arizona State game. They recovered it. But if both of your backs,
that was the end zone one, right? And then they take it for a safety, and where Ewers, it somehow just goes right to Ewers.
That's actually a good. Technically, that was still very bad. That's a really good point. It's like, yeah, his team recovered it, but yeah. And so the point being, there's not a back that I'm like, well, this is a. Gosh, as weird as it sounds to say, it's almost like the conservative or safe approach would be giving the ball to Quinn Ewers, because his turnovers will at least come downfield if he has them. And you need to give him the keys to this, because there's not a lot of guys who are going to win one-on-one matchups on the offensive side specifically. I think defensively, it will be a little bit more interesting. I think, again, PK, we have a lot of respect for him. We know the names on that side of the ball that, if hate to say if anyone can at this point, but you like your chances a lot better on defense than you do on offense right now, because again, look at the negative plays. Look how Georgia went down. That could be a very similar script here, where you get a bad turnover, you get a weird special teams thing, and you're looking down the barrel at a team that doesn't really need to throw the ball, and now you do. And so, point being, I think that they could control the game by not really leaning too heavy on the run game, not saying, hey, we're going to do a bunch of like shotgun passing stuff, but trying to get Ewers those easy looks early to where he gets. I mean, again, played really confidently to start the last game. Didn't translate to the end. Well, it did translate to the end, but there was a lull there. But point being, like, I'm actually of the opinion that you can't even have the mistakes and win this game. I think you just need to play pretty close to mistake-free football as Ewers, because other players, these are 19 to 25-year-old kids, if you're Diego Pavia, and they're going to make mistakes. And you are the leader and the star of this team. You're the guy who used to be on Ohio State. You are the chosen son of Texas. Like, you need to be this guy to kind of end your career or your career at Texas in a way that kind of correctly represents it. Because, and I'm going to finish out on this. Like I said, they had me asking the question, like, what has this tenure been? And it's like, well, this year has made a lot of people, myself included, recency bias, think, Quinn Ewers hadn't been that great for Texas. No, Quinn Ewers was awesome for Texas. And we need that player to show up, or they need that player to show up against Ohio State, because this is a true David and Goliath situation. Say what you will about the roster is. Let's look at the guys. Let's look at the dudes. This is a true David and Goliath situation where there's only really one matchup on the offensive side of the ball that I feel good enough about that I can trust it,
One last question.
Mm-hmm.
Most important question. We buried the lead. Is this a Toby Keith game for both coaches? Definitely think it is for Ryan Day.
Yep.
Getting to a national championship,
mm-hmm.
beating Texas, beating Oregon, beating Tennessee like a drum. Definitely got that potential. I mean, I think Ryan Day was looking at pretty much every game this playoff as a potential Toby Keith win for him.
Mm-hmm.
I think it should be on the table for Sark, because he'd be 2 years removed from being in those early hot seat discussions. He's 6 years removed, obviously, from the Falcons, basically making him a casualty for a 7-9 season, even though they had a top 10 offense that year.
Mm-hmm.
So many people have said, and this is a lot of Oklahoma fans who made this case coming into this year, that Sark has never proven to have sustained success, which previously you could say, well, the guy's never had consecutive 9-win seasons. Well, now it's consecutive playoff seasons, and that list is I think 7 coaches that have been able to do that, 3 of which are still at their current jobs. So that's the question that I'll be, of course, thinking about as this game. Is this a Toby Keith moment? Is he about to have a Toby Keith moment, Steve Sarkisian?
Yeah, and I mean, to your point, what's crazy about this is this: even though Ohio State should win this game, is favored in this game will certainly mean more for Ryan Day than it will Sark because,
Definitely.
yeah, he got his
Definitely.
team to say what you will about seeding. But again, I've always said from like this is once we saw what this team was, this is a floor raising season. The fact that they made it this far and didn't puke on their shoes, right? They lost to Georgia twice. If you lose to Georgia, to Ohio State, that's a good season. I don't care who you are. If you lose the SEC championship game to Georgia, you lose. Hey, the first one not great, but who among us? And it's like, yeah, you just weren't the team this year. Texas does not feel like a championship team to me this year. But if they beat Ohio State, that path becomes a
Changes
lot
everything.
easier. That's the key, is that you could change your story. But I think Sark's story was more about, to your point, consistency. Are you a guy who's going to crash out, as the kids say? Are you going to be a guy who can't handle the pressure? Are you going to be a guy who's screaming on the sidelines? Ryan Day's thing was just he's kind of like, I hate to say soft, but Sark was the other way where he was like too intense. And it was like, can he hold a job for this long? So yeah, I think that either way, it's more of a Ryan Day game because getting smoked by Ohio State, again, happened to Oregon. Are they looking at their guy?
Yeah, maybe some people are just realizing, Dan Lanning is still very early in his career. Still very, again, a 30-something coach has not won a national title since Clemson in 1981. That's what we're talking about here.
Wow.
Yeah. Isn't that crazy?
That is crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. One last thing. It's going to come down to the national championship for our playoff draft because I have Ohio State and Texas. You have Penn State, Notre Dame.
Oh, no.
We're tied 3 points apiece. So basically, this game irrelevant for both of us. It'll come down to the national championship. Wanted to update the people on that. I feel pretty good about my chances. Feel pretty good.
Yeah, to be honest, I think either way you're pretty good there. But and then hey, that's the real. As I get on Twitter, sadly, if Notre Dame wins a title or Penn State, at least they can say, "Well, I won a little thing and I got Connor to, I don't know, apologize to Bevo or something."
I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. All right, let's kick it to Kris Budden. Great to catch up with her, discuss takeaways from her travels this season. Here is Kris. I'm now excited to be joined by a very special guest. It is the great Kris Budden. Kris, did you cancel Christmas this year?
No. In fact, I took my kids on a Disney cruise, but I did buy the insurance. For those that don't remember, last year my daughter opened up her Christmas presents early, and I canceled a trip to Disney. This year, I was going to take them on a trip on a Disney cruise, and I did buy the insurance just in case I did have to cancel it. But we went. Everyone's like, did you have a great time? And I was like, the kids had a great time. And my husband and I found out we're not cruise people. Disney did a great job. Kids loved it. That's all that matters. But it's basically like Disney World on a boat. And instead of going back to a hotel room, you go back to like a shoebox that moves that you can't look out the window because you might throw up.
Okay, when you say you're not cruise people, which is, I think we are, like my wife and I were in the same exact camp. We went on one cruise, great company, had an awesome time. We came away from it thinking we wouldn't do this unless a group of people asked us to do this again. What's the one thing that made you go, I'd rather do a different vacation?
There's just a lot of people everywhere. And like, I get it. It's Disney cruise. And so you are expected to be around a lot of people and a lot of kids. And listen, they do a great job like setting up the day, and we got to see all these shows, and we saw Mufasa, and you got to see the characters. Like my 5 and 8-year-old loved it. My daughter has her pink cast signed by Minnie Mouse. But like you are sitting at dinner, like swaying, and I'm like, and then like your kids are on top of each other because you're in this like 100 square foot little shoebox. I would go if there was like, I wanted to go to a bunch of islands and you just use the ship to get from place to place, not where you spent most of the day. And I will say this, we also left out of Galveston where it was a little bit chilly, so you couldn't really use the pool. Plus, the pools were closed half the time because some kids left some baby roosts at the bottom of the pool.
Hate it when that happens.
Yeah.
The absolute worst. Yeah. Ruin the fun for everyone. You're doing this right ahead of traveling for 20 days for the Australian Open, which will be out there covering. You're doing some Orange Bowl stuff as well en route to there. True or false, you are sick of football. That's why you're not doing anything national championship related.
I know. I was actually supposed to do radio for national championship, and our boss calls. And I'm obviously a big tennis person. It's how my husband and I met. He was like, what would be your interest level of the Australian Open? And it's never, because the playoffs are pushed back, like national championships on January 20th. And it was like, do you love the national championship doing radio or 17 days in Australia covering a Grand Slam? Kind of going to have to choose Australia.
I would choose that too. It's one thing if you're being asked to do on-air stuff for the national championship, like during the game and stuff.
Totally.
And it's like, oh, hey, I'm doing, this is what I've done. I built my entire career to do this. Australian Open's a different beast, and you get to do that stuff. Like that's now in a different stratosphere. Okay, let me throw a curveball at you. I've had a handful of things in my adult life that I have had to just do a 180 on. Like I've realized that these were things that I was completely out on, and then the more I watched or listened to them, I realized how wrong I was, and they were actually awesome. Bruno Mars, Julia Roberts, those are the two biggest ones for me. Is there anything like that comes to mind first? And I almost discount food, because food is one of those things where everybody's got taste buds that evolve over time. You could hate sushi when you're 12, then you have it when you're 25. You realize it's very good. But what's something like that for you? And I promise I have a point.
Oh, I don't know, because usually if I'm out on something, like I don't even try, like Harry Potter, like I should probably try Harry Potter, and I just think that I'm never gonna like it. Same thing with like Star Wars, Star Trek. I mean, I guess what was that series with Kristen Stewart and the vampire? Twilight. I thought that I would have been out on Twilight, and I actually very much enjoyed it. I got a stack of books next to me. So like books are the only really thing that come to mind. There's a lot of food that I was out on as a kid that I learned to like Brussels sprouts.
Mm-hmm.
Brussels sprouts very in, making a comeback. But yeah, I think Twilight would be what comes to mind.
Okay, it's the Harry Potter thing. You got a lot of time on a plane. I'm just saying, you want to roll through an entire series. It's a good place to do it. Okay, I say that because I am 2 Penn State wins away from having to do that with James Franklin. And you covered the Fiesta Bowl. Mm-hmm. Did you come away from that game thinking that Penn State truly looked like a team that could win it all? That's
TBD.
A no. That's a no.
It's hard because of the path, right? Like you go through SMU and then you go through Boise State. I mean, they did shut down for the majority of the game the best running back in the country and the runner-up for the Heisman. That said, I think you knew going up against Boise, if we could stop number 2, let anyone other than number 2 beat us. We talked about this a little bit on our radio show. There seems times offensively where it's like, where'd you guys go? Like, you have the best tight end in the country. You have 2 of the best running backs in the country. And sometimes it's like, what drive are we putting together, Andy Kotelnicki? I do think the Orange Bowl is the game. The game where we all sat here and have said, James Franklin's never won the big one. He can't win the big games. Like, that's a narrative changer. They're underdogs against Notre Dame. And if you go and do this, and that potentially sets up a matchup against Ohio State, and then what if you do come away with a win? I mean, I've covered a handful of Penn State games in the past where the 9 overtime game that they won over Illinois, they won that game, and I'm sitting at a restaurant and everyone's talking about wanting to get rid of James Franklin, right? There is this like, what is good enough? Like Thursday's game is going to be, to me, the decider. And I can't figure out offensively if they have it, like they have enough talent, but if Drew Aller has to win them a football game, can he get it done? And that, to me, there's still a question mark out there.
It's a good point. And I think 2 of the 3 best players left in the field, you could make a real case, Penn State players, with the exception of Jeremiah Smith. I'd say if Abdul Carter's healthy, if we're talking about Tyler Warren being used properly and not just being ignored like he was at the end of the Ohio State game, then Penn State has a really good case for it. But as you bring up, there are a lot of things to always consider, especially late in the game with Penn State, with James Franklin. You've covered a lot of Texas things over the years, including the Selection Sunday that they had where they get the playoff announcement. Compare that day to how it felt to cover other moments in Austin that you've witnessed prior to 2023, because it's wild to me how Texas forever was this traditional power who would never return to juggernaut status. And then all of a sudden on a Selection Sunday, it just kind of looks like business as usual.
Yeah. Because it's funny because I also had Texas the year before getting in on Selection Sunday. And I remember the uproar when their name, because there was more question marks. We were still only 4 teams. Were they going to get in? And there's this huge roar. And I remember like almost feeling like the building was shaking. And then this one was much more subdued. It was like, okay, who are we playing? And so I think that Sark has gotten them from a mentality standpoint of we're not hopeful to be there. We're not happy to get there. We deserve to be there. And for so long that Texas is back haunted them. And it's like no one talks about that anymore because this is a completely new era under Sark. But I do have question marks. Like Jesse Palmer put it perfectly in the game. Like sometimes Texas starts playing with their food in the middle of the game. And there's this great first 90 seconds of 2 great offensive plays and then a punt return for a kickoff or for a touchdown. And then what? And then where does it go? The fact that was the first game in a while that we didn't have to see Arch Manning. Can Texas, and that has been the knock for Texas for years. I remember after Sark's first year, they kept losing all these games in the fourth quarter, and he changed a lot of the stuff that he did in practice in order to get better in the fourth quarter. Now it's not fourth quarter. It's almost like the middle of the game that you're just like, where'd you go? Can you put on the gas for a full 4 quarters on what will be, I mean, the way that Ohio State has looked over the last 2 games to be an incredibly tough matchup. I mean, I don't know. Like Ohio State sat here and heard enough for the last month or so that our coach needs to be gone and that we stink. And they were like, let us show you. So I do have questions about Texas, but it does feel different of like, not that we're hoping to be there, but yeah, we're here.
Have you talked yourself into an upset, or are you going with Ohio State?
I think I can talk myself into an upset. You know, like this is always to me also like March Madness, right? Like the teams that you've seen the best of the best and you've seen them at their worst, you know? I mean, as long as Chip Kelly doesn't forget what he has in his wide receiver room, listen, I think that they're going to win. I also think that there has been enough, like, is that team where they are right now if they don't lose that Michigan game?
No,
I don't know.
No way.
Is Notre Dame where they are if they don't lose NIU? Like there's certain things. And I felt that Will Howard in that game at the Rose Bowl, for as well as he played that first matchup against Oregon, the only thing we remember is him sliding in the clock management at the end and the clock going out. And I think for him, that was a redemption. That game against Tennessee, everyone's coming to fill the horseshoe and it's going to be all orange. Like, let us show you. And does that sustain? Can you continue that against one of the best defenses in the country?
Yeah, now you don't have that angle of we're the underdogs. Everybody's picking against. No, Ohio State's the favorite, and you'd better win, or else we're going to be talking about Ryan Day on the hot seat again. Like that's just the way that this works. You were at the Egg Bowl this year. Black Friday, different vibe for the Egg Bowl, at least for those of us that are watching from home. Yeah. Had you covered that before?
I had not. I had done a lot of Georgia Tech. Oh, good old fashioned hate. Which was it would have been a heck of a year to have that one. No, but had the Egg Bowl, and it was definitely fun. Like you definitely got a sense that like in these rivalry games, like anything can happen, and you felt a little bit that of Mississippi State, and they kept it close for a while. But that was my first chance of getting to see that rivalry.
I almost texted you after the post-game interview with Jackson Dart because he and Lane, those who watch this know what I'm talking about. He and Lane shared this very long hug, and Lane said something to you before looking Jackson in the eye. I was like, get it together, man. Like snap out of it. You're about to go on live television. Like you got to be able to say a word. Do you remember what he said to you?
I don't know. I just looked at like, he gets this like wide eye, like this is awkward. Is this kid ever going to stop hugging
all right, buddy. All right.
Like, and then he claps. He's like, whew. And you're just like, but I like their relationship's really cool because Lane was like, I didn't know that, you know, after Matt Corral had left, that like they had a special relationship, whether or not he'd ever have that with a quarterback again. And those two have been very open about just their growth. That the fact after losing that game at Florida, like Jackson went over to his house and just watched football. Didn't watch game film. He just like sat on Lane's couch and watched football. Like that. And I was like, can you imagine any other quarterback and head coach duo doing that? Like, I can't imagine Carson Beck being like, hey, Kirby, like, can I just come over and hang? Like maybe Sark and Quinn. Like, I'm trying to think like that it's just very rare. And part of it's the age of Lane and that he is very youthful, but that was very cool to see like their development over the years.
Yeah, if it was James Franklin, he'd ask you to go set it up with his secretary before doing that, but that's a different subject for a different time. Was that a better post-game interview than the Hugh Freeze one after the A&M game because you didn't have to dodge a field rush?
Oh, yeah. I love a field rush. I really do. Like,
do you though? I wouldn't.
Yes, I do. Yeah, like there's like, and by the way, you see it coming. Like it's not like like I've never been part of a court storming or a field storming where I was like, didn't see that coming. Like people's legs are halfway over the thing. And it is kind of a challenge. Like, got to make sure I don't lose the coach. And then like you lose your cameraman and you're like, or producer's like, we don't have a camera on you. I was like, I don't care. Like I'm standing here with them. I'm going to lose them. Like, let's do it. The worst one was the field storming in Atlanta for Georgia Tech over Miami, because Brent Key is just so offensive lineman energy that he doesn't even have words. And when I asked him what Haynes King gave him today, and he's like, he played. That's it, coach.
That's where he, in the opener against Florida State, and he slipped into run the ball, and he like slipped into Feinbaum caller. Like, Brent Key, what are you saying right now? Did he even know what planet he was on? He just cared about winning the football game, and everything after that, he just goes completely blank.
By the way, funny, not a funny story because it is sad for the girl. If you've ever been to Bobby Dodd Stadium, it is a large drop off from where on one side, which would be Georgia Tech's side, to get down to the field. It's a good like 8-foot drop over like a brick wall. And I do my interview. I'm getting off. Everyone is still like piling onto the field. I go to my audio thing, and there is a girl laying on the ground because she bit it and could no longer walk. So it is a little dangerous, people. Just be prepared. Maybe have someone catch you on your way down if you are attempting to be a part of a field storming.
For the record, field storming, court rushing, completely okay with the semantics of it. I'm speaking as someone that when I go to the grocery store and there is a blockage in an aisle, I get ready to lose my mind, and I just want people to acknowledge my existence. And that is the ultimate situation where people do not acknowledge each other's existence. And it would just mess with my paranoia. Would love to be part of one someday. But yeah, this is like, I always feel like the ability to be able to get there, and we've talked about this before, the ability to get there and get that interview. I mean, that's everything in that moment. But you were probably at this point just happy to get field storm games, because last year, didn't you have dud after dud?
Gosh. We had so many blowouts last year because like this was what has been great, not just about the 12-team playoff, but just the parity this year of like we had a bunch of upsets. We had an upset of SMU over Louisville. We had the Georgia Tech over Miami. Like we had a bunch of them, and you like there's just, when you, especially when it's only 4-team playoff, like by October, if you don't have one of those 6 teams that's in the hunt, like your storylines aren't as great. And, then you're getting, we also didn't have teams, like every team had a flaw this year. A lot of teams had a lot of flaws. And so there was always this chance that these teams could get upset, and you go in knowing that. And so it just in general, like, also, can I just say, being with Louis Riddick, like such a smart, wonderful dude. And I'm going to cry if he goes to become a GM somewhere, maybe the Jets. But like also like enjoyable being around him as well, because I've just like learned so much football from him.
Very respected person in this industry. It seems like never heard a bad thing about Louis. I know Matt Berry worked with him and just absolutely love the guy. Seems like somebody that just can do whatever he wants. Just got to figure out what his next 15, 20 years look like.
Yeah.
I'll get you out of here because I know you got a lot to do, but I want to get you out of here talking some Mizzou things.
Yeah.
I feel like, well, let's first we're going to flip the reporter hat into a fan hat, which is important for this discussion. Mizzou wins 10 games. It's a nice finish for Brady Cook, but unlike in 2023 when Mizzou's this upstart, it's I think just one of those things that even if you're a neutral fan or you're just looking on the outside, you can tell why people are talking about Mizzou. I don't think this year you have to include Mizzou when you tell the story of college football. How did you kind of view this season overall?
Yeah. The year before you go and you win the Cotton Bowl and it's this, okay, now Mizzou is deserved to be in this conversation as a contender in the SEC. Whereas I feel like, there's been this look at Mizzou, like you should just be happy to be in our conference. When like, if you look at the start of when they got into the conference, they won the East 2 out of the, first 3 years there. And then, so then everyone's like, oh, wow, look at where Mizzou is. And I felt like there was like this momentum. Now the problem became, okay, well, we started off the season saying that you were favored in 11 of your 12 games. Now, is Mizzou going to be part of the CFP? Like now the standard has changed, and it should be. It should be there with the talent that Eli has brought in and what you had returning. But there did almost end up being like this, like we could see it, right? We could see this path to be part of the discussion of the CFP. And at times almost felt like a disappointment. There was a lot more close games than there should have been at times. But it was really fun to watch. Like, hats off to Brady Cook and what he gave that fan base and he gave that team this year, despite all of the injuries that he had. It was a really enjoyable year. And at least I'm glad. I'd rather be disappointed that, we didn't make the CFP and at least still think that like we deserve to be in that conversation than the rest of the world looking at us being like, whoa, like who is the Missouri Tigers and where's Columbia, Missouri? Like, no, there was a time there where they were number one in the BCS and we were part of the discussion with Brad Smith and Chase Daniel and everybody else. And I felt like preseason talk leading into up until really the loss at A&M and Blanket Gate that, they had deserved the pub of being talked about, the top of the SEC.
Blanket Gate was the end of it, right?
Like you do look at, there was one half of the season and then Blanket Gate happened and there was the second half of the season. It might have been a curse.
Once we found out from the A&M side that wasn't an A&M thing, I said, Drink is pushing all the buttons.
Did that shock you at all?
No, that's the problem.
I know. At first I was like, wait, what? And then I was like, tracks.
Whatever you can to motivate Theo Weiss, I guess you got to do. The guy's been playing college football forever, but yeah. All right. Yeah. Whatever you got to do. Okay, so let's say Chase Daniel is the GOAT. Let's say there's no discussion. He is the best quarterback in Mizzou history. Give me number 2 among Mizzou quarterbacks. Recent memory. We'll keep it to the modern era. Brady Cook. You can pick between Brady Cook, Drew Lock, the very underrated James Franklin, other James Franklin.
Yes.
And Blaine Gabbert.
Probably Blaine Gabbert. I mean, hey, Brad Smith was pretty good when I was there too. True. Leading up to that's like way dating. People are gonna be like, who the heck's Brad Smith? Probably Blaine Gabbert. I would say is 2. Can I say this also? Like, as disappointed as I was that we weren't in the CFP, we did beat Kansas in basketball.
That's all people care about anyways, right?
I know. Remember, we were a basketball school.
That's basketball school, journalism school.
They didn't win a single SEC game last year, but they beat Kansas at their home court. We never beat Kansas when I was there, and I slept in tents, and I was part of the zoo crew, and never did it. And so at least, hey, we'll have that.
That's all that matters in the end, really. Okay, last one for you. Who's got bragging rights in your household? Because your husband's a Tennessee fan. So on one hand, he got the playoff. Mm-hmm. You're able to get in there and feel like that's a legitimate accomplishment. I do, and I don't want to take away from what Tennessee did.
Yeah.
But his team got walloped on the national stage, and both of your schools ended up 10-3, and they didn't face each other. So who gets the true bragging rights?
Oh, he gets the true bragging rights because remind you also, he's like still coming off of the baseball championship. So, I mean, he does have a natty win. I also cover that championship. So he does. I will say this. We were on the cruise when it happened, the Ohio State game. And he was like, I'm going to skip dinner. You take the kids. I was fine. I was like, that's fine. Have your moment. And then the first 10 minutes happened and I thought we were going to get tossed overboard because there was screaming and yelling coming from one of the cabins on the second floor. And then he wised up and realized maybe I should just watch the rest of the thing on Gamecast. But, props to Tennessee. Basketball, women's basketball, baseball. This is such a great college town that went through a very bad 10 years. And now my husband's pissed off because they lost in the CFP. They deserve to be there. What happens next year? Because I don't know what's happening in Knoxville. Seems like everyone's leaving. Leaving their team. I don't know what's happening. So yeah, we'll see what happens next year.
We'll see. I look, just getting there. That's after the decade that was, and you're exactly right. It helps when you're really good at all those other sports like Tennessee is.
Share this cool story because we had Tennessee, Florida. Again, another close game that we didn't think was going to be close. That was the game that Graham Mertz got hurt. And talk about Florida season, that Graham Mertz getting hurt changed their second half of the season. But so I'm sitting there and then it's a night game. It is we're waiting for the fireworks and the running out of the tee. And I see Tony Vitello down there, baseball coach. Say hi to him. And this guy from afar is like, Kris, what's up? And it's a former relief pitcher for the Padres. And I was like, what are you doing here? And he was like, oh, I'm here with Max Scherzer. Like, we're good buddies. And I was like, of course, Max Scherzer, connection, Mizzou, Tony Vitello. And Tony's like, yeah, it's a big recruiting weekend for us. And I was like, oh, so you just bring in Max Scherzer. But so we're all standing there watching like the beginning, the running out of the tee. And I'm sitting next to Scherzer and he's like, wow, like this is really cool. And like for people like that at his status to sit there on the sidelines at Neyland Stadium and be like in awe of the scene, you're like, that's pretty special. Like we're wowing aces over here.
My buddy, who a very different perspective, like suburbs of Chicago native, thought he's experienced the coolest sports things in the world, has been to 3 Tennessee games in the last 2 years. Same exact reaction of watching and just being like, okay, this is different.
Yeah.
I get it. I understand the SEC way. I understand the Tennessee way and why people obsess over this. And maybe they, just decide to make loud noises from their cabin on a Disney cruise when things are going their way. Yeah. I get it.
At least there was no iPhones broken. It's why I keep the insurance on the iPhone.
Insurance on the cruise, insurance on the iPhone.
The one game we did watch, so I had the Egg Bowl on Friday, and I was like, great, I can get home, watch college football Saturday with my husband. I don't ever get to do this. That was the Vanderbilt game, and it lasted 15 seconds into the kickoff return for a touchdown. There was a lot of yelling, and I apparently ruined the juju and was not allowed to watch it with him the rest of the day.
Well, it worked.
Yeah, it worked.
So, I mean, you just need to do that when, well, I guess that's not a Diego Pavia thing. That's a Tennessee thing. I was going to say you should do that. Auburn fans will reach out to you, be like, when Diego Pavia faces Hugh Freeze again, you're going to have to do that. Just leave the room.
Exactly. Yeah.
Kris, you're the best. Safe travels. Enjoy Australia. Enjoy reading Harry Potter to and fro.
Appreciate it. Probably not Harry Potter.
All right. Well, let's close with some lad of the week. Mind if I start?
Go ahead.
Bryce Young. Yeah. I've been rooting for Bryce Young in the NFL. Okay. And I hated the notion that he was already a bust in year 2 with just the worst surroundings imaginable. I hated the pre-draft discussions about his height. We talked about this. We don't need to repeat that. I hated even the instance of my team having the 1 in a million trade heist that never happens for the Bears and him kind of being on the wrong end of that. That even didn't sit right with me. But seeing him come back the way that he has after his benching has just been incredible. I won't pretend that I watch full Panthers games. I don't even have time to watch full Bears games. Yes, I would never do that to myself. Why would I? So I'm admittedly highlight watching, box score watching with a lot of this stuff, okay, in ways that I do not do with college football. But the throw that he made where he did the Steph Curry turnaround, just the perfect sign that dude is back. He's feeling himself. He's looking like the guy that we saw at Bama, and a guy who for 2 years at Bama was must-see TV, in my opinion. I thought he was unbelievably special. I thought he was so fun to watch. I banged the drum that I thought he was the best Bama quarterback of all time. I made that case by the time that he finished his career and thought that, man, I want to see this guy for 15 years do this in the NFL. It would just be really, really fun to watch. And seeing the joy that he's playing with now has just been great. And I'll continue to root for that guy. He's putting up huge numbers. First Panthers quarterback to have 3 passing touchdowns and 2 rushing touchdowns in a game ever.
Oh,
Cam Newton.
See, there we can compare it to Cam Newton. Fairly, finally. Look at that.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
That's one time where I will bring up Cam Newton. Cam Newton didn't do that. Cam Newton gave him a nice little shout out afterwards.
And Cam Newton also played the Falcons twice a year, so you can't even hold that against him.
Exactly. Special things happen when Bryce Young gets to play at Mercedes-Benz. That's what I would say. So
that's fire.
Love rooting for Bryce.
Yeah, mine is going to be a little bit of eating crow. This is a random athlete that I've talked a lot of mess about. You probably haven't heard of it, but I'm going to give him his flowers for this one. This is Tampa Bay Buccaneers wide receiver Mike Evans.
Oh, I thought you were going to go Liam Cohen. Dang.
Liam Cohen, yeah, he should. They're in an interesting spot because I think the fans want him to have that job. But anyway, so Mike Evans is a guy that, as a Saints fan, we have had this kind of rivalry with him. Marshawn Lattimore has played for whatever reason with his hair on fire, like one of the Georgia defenders the entire time they played together. So my joke was, I've never seen the good version of Mike Evans because I watched against Marshawn
Hater.
Lattimore. And it's funny because in, a kind of stretch here where we saw Gastineau and Brett Favre have that weird little exchange, but I found myself
so weird. So weird. I just rewatched the New York Sack Exchange, the 30 for 30 on ESPN, and I saw that again, and I was reminded because I like put that out of sight, out of mind a couple of years ago, and then I watched it again in the doc, and I thought to myself, this is the most uncomfortable human interaction I've ever seen in my entire life. Mark Gastineau, Brett Favre, Google it, do that on your own time, kids. Yeah.
I found myself watching Mike Evans get, his like 7th consecutive 1,000-yard season and like basically break Jerry Rice's record, right? And I actually don't even know the number because at that point I was inflamed with rage. But I was watching him break this record and I was like, I just felt a sense of like, you know what? He did it. At the end of the day, that was the thing that I would always say is like, oh, these are like garbage time stats, da-da-da. But unfortunately, against my team to win the division for the 4th consecutive time, a nice little bullet point, a nice little exclamation point on the Mike Evans career is his signature stat, 1,000-yard receiving seasons, taking that away from Jerry Rice on a play that the Saints, I think,
they could have kneeled.
They kind of let him have it.
Yeah.
And it's a $3 million bonus. As an NFL player,
Yep.
Even your rivals, this isn't the Larry Bird days. And I watched that happen, and I just went, look at how hard it is to do this many years in a row, you son of a bee. It actually is. Like, it's like, well, people are like, oh, he's hurt. I'm like, yeah, that's kind of the point. It's kind of hard to play. Like, I watched Mike Thomas be the best receiver in the NFL for like 2 or 3 years, and now where is he? Mike Evans was drafted like a smooth almost decade before that gentleman is still playing. And like, I've given him so much crap over my. I mean, this is a guy who was like I guess he played in the SEC because that was the Manziel year. So he was, I think, recruited. Yeah, he recruited to the Big 12 and like played a little bit of Big 12, but was, I guess, an SEC draftee, as I would describe it. And I just remember being like, oh, this guy, and I'm looking at it, I was just like, this is actually, I get it now. This is actually incredible. I'm not going to go as far as to say that he's like a Hall of Famer that's up to me.
Oh, he's a Hall of Famer. No doubt.
I am a hater at my core. I'm not going to concede that point, but Schefter sure tweeted it yesterday.
First
so at
ballot.
the end of the day, this is a guy. And at the end of the day, Tom Brady shows up. My whole thing is your career happens in garbage time. You beat my team on the road, and then you win the Super Bowl. So if you're going to sit here and say, oh, this didn't matter, well, you have just as many Super Bowls as my team. So I just want to be nice one time to this gentleman because I've given him so many years of hate.
The $3 million bonus thing on a play that was just garbage time, and the doppelganger he just dials it up for them, and you see the celebration afterwards. And I saw that highlight, and that was such a cool thing to see him get $3 million on this play because he was 5 yards short. If they don't draw up this play, that $3 million bonus, and it was such a cool thing that I talked at Lauren about it. That's how you know something is cool. She's like, yeah, I wish I cared about this stuff. I just don't. I'm like, I know, but I just had to tell someone about it.
Been there. Yeah, by the way, the number is 11. Jeez. I remember when it was 8. I don't know why I said 7, but it's 11. And the fact of like, yeah, man, I guess, okay, yeah, the 17-game season. He played 17 games one time. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's all legit. So, hate to say it, but tip of the cap.
Unreal, Mike Evans. All right, schedule for us. We're gonna record on Sunday. We're gonna recap the playoffs. So this will be the last like midweek pod that we're doing. We'll recap all things playoff related. If you have not, please leave us a 5-star review. Subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can watch every episode of the Saturday Down South podcast. Follow us on Twitter at the SDS Pod, at Stat Down South, at CJ Guerra, at Go So Hard. Thanks, guys. Talk soon.